Happens, and today we're taking a look at the Sunflower by Flower Petals. This is Sunflower, and this is the latest and inarguably the most ambitious offering from Flower Petals to date. We are dealing today with a wonderful stereo tremolo with about every feature you could hope for from a tremolo. So let's start things off by talking through the feature set here, and then we will kind of cover some of my opinions and then get into some sound samples, because I think that's really where you have to go with something like this. The Sunflower has, like I said, about anything you could hope for out of a stereo tremolo. You have your volume control, you have your obvious stuff like your speed and your depth, subdivisions, a bunch of waveforms, and access to a harmonic tremolo as well as a standard amplitude tremolo. Where things start to get really interesting is in a couple of key areas. First off, one of the biggest ones is that the fact that this is stereo, and it's not just stereo in the traditional like stereo pass-through. You actually have sub-controls on each of these knobs, almost each of these knobs, that are all labeled as well, which means you won't get lost, that allow you to change very specific parameters about this thing. So on this width control down here, the standard control is the width of the harmonic tremolo, your low frequency and your high frequency separation in that harmonic trem. But by pressing and holding your right foot switch, you can also bring in some stereo widening on the tremolo itself, which means you can go from a standard dual mono, moving in unison tremolo all the way out to one of those big washy, crazy hard left, hard right panning tremolos, but also kind of anything in between, which is really, really helpful because a lot of people don't like that aggressive stereo tremolo thing. And like I said, you may have heard me say that you're blending in that harmonic tremolo with one knob right there. And what that means is full clockwise, you can actually go full harmonic trem, full counterclockwise, you can go full amplitude trem, but you can actually blend in between the two anywhere in the middle. And using this center divisions knob with the submenu control with that tap, with the hold button, you can actually set a separate tap tempo for your harmonic tremolo, allowing you to create kind of like multi-rhythms between the two different trem voices in this pedal. In the same vein of talking about voices in this pedal, you have a bunch of waveforms all on one knob, which is really, really helpful. You have this knob right here with this switch right next to it, with three settings essentially. You have your center toggle position, which allows you to go from a sine wave to a kind of like collapsed sine wave, to a really kind of like bulbous one where there's not a lot of negative space. It's mostly kind of around the top of the hump, all the way over to a square wave. And they're not notched settings. You can blend in between any of those settings. In that left toggle position, that same knob now controls the shape of your triangle waveform, starting at a sawtooth up, moving to a triangle at the top, and then a ramping down sawtooth that can really have a very cool sidechainy synthy aesthetic, especially when you're playing it in time with the music you're writing. And again, you have the ability to blend between those sawtooths and that more traditional triangle. You can create soft asymmetrical waveforms, all of that stuff. And then on that right toggle position, you have one of my favorite things, random tremolo. You have access to a progressively more complicated random LFO controlling the waveform of this trem, which is really cool to have. That is a lot of waveforms all packed into one knob in a relatively easy system. On this other side, you have another switch right here that actually lets you control the ramping properties of the Sunflower. And by ramping, I mean the ability to set two different speeds on this tremolo and move between them in three configurable ways. One is latching. So you hit that left switch and it goes from one speed to the next one. Center position is momentary, where you press and hold to ramp to your second speed. Or third is a drift control, wherein you use the secondary controls on your depth and your speed to set two different rates of tremolo, and then the pedal just moves between them. It's like auto ramping, it's like bouncing and the Chase Bliss stuff. If you're familiar with that, that's an easy way to kind of like reference this. This thing has a lot of features. You've also got a control port on the right side here that will let you put in an expression pedal for control over any and all of the features except for your subdivision control. And then you've got MIDI as well. You have the ability to use that port for MIDI control, which is a big deal because, like we've covered already, there's a lot going on the face of this pedal. All of it's useful, all of it is worth diving into. As you'll hear when we get to those sound samples, there are a lot of wonderful and unique things to access in here. And one of the really great things is this guy has 5 onboard presets if MIDI isn't your thing. You have the ability to tap both buttons together and scroll through presets that you can adjust and save, including all secondary parameter controls, expression control, all of that stuff. So if you're not a MIDI person, there is still the ability to kind of get a lot out of this pedal, which is awesome. Lastly, just a small, really useful thing that I like. So that right LED right here will actually light up different colors based on what preset you're on. The left one is your tap tempo light, letting you know what rate you're at, and it will flash different colors to showcase your harmonic and your amplitude-based tremolos, so you can kind of know what that rhythm is a little bit more just by sight. Little things like that, I think, are what make the Sunflower such an impressive offering, being the first really complicated, kind of like ambitious MIDI stereo trem that this company has done. Like, there's a lot of really, really smart choices in this pedal. There's some stuff like, I wish that these switches here were down below. That would be really, really helpful. But I appreciate that kind of, they're not generally things you're going to change on the fly. So getting in there is not that big of a deal, and you don't risk kicking them. But these down here would have been nice. Separate control and MIDI ports would have been nice as well. But it's hard to really complain too much about this. The stereo image on it is really good, and it's subtle when you want it to be. The waveforms feel really good and lush and interesting. The boost control is not a gain control. It's not like, it doesn't have clipping. It's just level control, which is great because I can put it after my amp sims in my wet effects section. It's just really impressive. I really, really was very happy when I kind of plugged this thing in and started playing with it. That speed gets really, really slow. And when you start bringing in that width control and that stereo widening, you can get some really interesting, slow moving, kind of big ambient textures with this thing alongside with all of the rhythmic stuff. So let's get into some sound samples. Flower pedals. This is really good. Well done, you guys. Yeah, let's give it a listen. Okay, before we jump into our sound samples, let's go ahead and talk through our signal chain and the context we are playing in. I am playing my Jennings Voyager with McNelly Steiger Swagger pickups into the Benson Germanium Boost, the Origin Effects Cali 76, the Bondi Sick As Mark III, the Bell Star from Jackson Audio, and the Chase Bliss Audio Mood. From there, we go into our amplifier, which is the UA Ruby 63, which is like an AC30 style top boost amplifier. The Strymon El Cap in stereo, the Sunflower by Flower Pedals, and the Strymon Flint. From there, we go to our DISO Plus line isolator and off to our DAW, which is Universal Audio's Luna. We're not going to make a lot of changes to the overall signal chain that we play with in this sound sample section. We are running the Sick As, the El Cap, and the Flint, all pretty subtle. So this is what that sounds like before we bring in the Sunflower. As I mentioned, we are running the El Cap in front of the Sunflower, and the reason for that is because we're running it as a stereo delay and a stereo, a little bit of spring reverb, and that's all just kind of to give the Sunflower a little bit more to chew on. Oftentimes, it's nice to have a tremolo behind your reverbs or your delays or some of your kind of like longer time-based wet effects, just so that when you stop playing, you've got a little bit more movement happening in your signal for your tremolo to play with. And with something like the Sunflower being in stereo, that actually comes in really, really handy. So let's go ahead and turn on the Sunflower and give some basic sounds a listen. We're going to go ahead and start things off really, really simple and kind of build from there. We're going to start with kind of primary control functions of each of the knobs. Then we will move to the secondaries. Then we will move to the toggles. And I want to kind of ramp up our complication with the Sunflower because I think that that's the most kind of effective way to get a handle on what's happening here. We're going to start off with the primary functions of all the knobs and then move to the secondary functions and then finally some of these toggle switches to kind of get peak complexity out of this pedal. So starting things off, we've got our boost set pretty close to unity. We've got depth and speed at pretty reasonable levels, and we have a nice sine wave going for our waveform. We are completely at amplitude tremolo, not any harmonic tremolo brought into things, and then the division knob is kind of out of play right now because we've set our time with our speed control. So let's give it a listen. I mean, even off the bat, you can tell that's like a nice lush trem. If we take this El Cap out and kind of like mono up our signal, let's turn off everything. Sounds like, you know, very narrow now. And this will reflect that. But we can bring in that El Cap in front. So let's start things off in the top left-hand corner here with our boost control. This is essentially just the level of the pedal. It says boost, but you're not getting any clipping or anything, which means having it after our amplifier is not an issue. You've got your dry volume here. And we're slightly quieter. You can take it further down from there. For context, that was my DAW clipping, not the pedal. You have a very, very powerful depth and rate controls here. The rate gets crazy slow. Let's start with the depth. Let's take it nice and shallow. And again, taking out that El Cap, taking out that big stereo image. And this is before us utilizing any of the width controls or the stereo spread controls in this pedal. Bring that back just a hair. Actually, let's max it out because the speed on this thing actually gets crazy slow. Seriously, very slow. You have the depth control here, which is tap tempo. Pretty straightforward. You know, half, quarter, dotted eighth, eighth, triplet, the usuals. Back to the traditional speed control. And let's walk through our kind of like main waveforms. You've got a sine wave. Next up, we are jumping up to the sine wave control, and this is going to be the first point where we kind of have to bring in one of our toggle switches. You have a shape toggle that goes along with your waveforms. You basically have a center toggle, a left toggle, and a right toggle, and corresponding parameter controls for this knob right here, which is really cool. It's state dependent on this. In the center position, we are dealing in sine waves. On the left side, we are dealing in triangles. And on the right side, we are dealing with random. So basically, in the center position, you have a very even sounding sine wave right here. It gets a little bit more peaky. I don't know what the term for this particular waveform is, but kind of it starts slow, it ramps fast, and then drops fast, and kind of lands slow again. So I guess the best way to describe it would be spending more time at the bottom of the waveform. And then conversely, you have the opposite of that, something a little bit more bulbous at the top. Less dead air. And of course, the classic, the square. Okay, going to the left toggle here, we are now dealing with triangle-based waves. On this one, we have 3 positions. We have ramp up, proper triangle at the top, and ramp down. And I believe they are all kind of state-specific within the knob twisting parameters. So it kind of evens out as you go. Yes, so ramp up. And now you can hear it start to even out into more of a natural triangle. At the top, you have a proper, like, symmetrical triangle waveform. And now it starts to bend towards a ramp down. And a proper ramp down. So hard square on one side, proper triangle on the other. Ramp up and ramp down have always been some of my favorite tremolo modes. We're going to get lost in that if we don't move on. And thirdly, we have the random side. Counterclockwise, less random, less quickly changing random. And as you turn that up, it gets more random more quickly. I guess a better way to say that would be it becomes more complexly random. Let's jump back to that traditional sine wave. Because now it is time to start bringing in this width control right here. Width might sound, when you're looking over the pedal, as a, quote, stereo tremolo pedal, like it's going to be your width control for that stereo image, but it's actually not. That control is a sub control on that same knob. What this is a progressive blending in of a harmonic tremolo. And as you turn it up, it increases the distance between the low and high points of those harmonic frequencies. And at minimum, you have fully amplitude tremolo, and at maximum, you have fully harmonic tremolo. But there's a ton of blending to be done in between here and there. And there are ways to separate out the rates of those two. So let's go ahead and start playing with the width and just kind of look at the basics of blending the two together. And now that we're fully clockwise here, we get fully harmonic tremolo. And obviously there are really interesting and complex ways to blend those together, even without getting them out of sync from one another. And again, we haven't even touched the secondary parameters on this pedal yet. This is all just face value, literal face value. Okay, let's get into the secondary controls on this thing. We've got everything kind of back to a nice baseline, a decent amount of depth, a moderately slow, normal amplitude tremolo. And let's start things out with the kind of most interesting thing, which is the stereo width control on this thing. For all of these parameter controls, you press and hold your bypass control and twist the knob to start kind of adjusting some of these secondary functions. So we'll take the El Cap out for now, so you can really hear it in a vacuum. Bring that El Cap back in for emphasis. And again, random plays a very potent role in this mode as well. Bring that back down. Get back to a normal tremolo. And let's jump over to this one right here. This is your harmonic tremolos subdivision, which is its own thing, which is awesome. So you can do this and then set a separate subdivision for your harmonic tremolo. So let's set it to an 8th note and then set our tap tempo for our main tremolo at a half note. So now our normal amplitude tremolo but as we turn up this width control, let's speed up that tremolo a little bit. You can hear the harmonic tremolo underneath the main tremolo, pulsating at a different interval. And again, we're getting into like real significant complexity here when you kick over to a random waveform and you dial in that width, and then you also dial in some stereo separation between your left and right channels. Okay, so let's go ahead and wrap up these sound samples by taking a look at the latching, ramping, and drift controls with this left toggle switch here. You have basically access to latching ramping, momentary lamping, and what is called drift, which is essentially just kind of auto ramping at all times. You can set your various speeds and controls using the submenu controls on the depth and the speed control up here. We'll start off with the latch control, which basically functions the same as the momentary, but we're not going to use the momentary because I can't get my foot up on top of the table here. So, but it's the same thing, just the difference is holding versus tapping. So let's go ahead and set some speeds. For latching, we're going to jump over to the left position there. We've got our main speed, nice and slow. A nice high depth. And you know what? Let's go to square just so it's super duper obvious. Kind of a softened square. Okay, now holding that right switch, we'll set our secondary speed to be much faster. And you hear we jump back down to slow again. We tap this. And using these sub-controls on the depth right here, you can set how fast that change happens. Very, very slow. It's slowly coming down. Back up to fast, back down to slow, very, very slowly. Really cool, really like noticeable but very progressive slow changes if you want them, or whip fast. I like something in the middle. And conversely, like I said, you have a momentary in the middle there. Let's speed up that change rate again. So with momentary, I guess one of the, especially in the tabletop setting, one of the benefits would be if you make it instant, you've got really quick bursts. So let's take depth to max, that square all the way up. Ooh, let's take that to triangle actually. Yep, super cool. And then if you jump over to drift, you now have basically two different speeds you set using these two controls. You've got drift and then another drift up here, and you can set your kind of like complementary tremolo speeds, and it will just kind of go back and forth between the two. And so in this context, this kind of like auto ramping thing, let's go ahead and jump over to our random waveform, turn that down a little bit, blend in that harmonic trem, and bring in a complementary subdivision for that harmonic trem, and hear what we get when we kind of take everything we've covered so far and just apply it to one really, really overly complicated tremolo sound. For context, no delay, no reverb. And then in context,